They said no one could escape the plantation. 100 hunters tried, and all failed. But two twins, bound by a secret no chain could break, dared the impossible. Tonight, the forest itself becomes their weapon. August 14th, 1842. The sun scorched the earth with a cruelty that matched the masters of the plantation. Sweat dripped down foreheads, soaking cotton shirts, pooling into the dry, cracked soil. Cicadas droned relentlessly, a background hum to the monotony and brutality of the fields. But in the shadowed corners of the labor quarters, where few dared to notice, something impossible stirred. Two cries, sharp, jagged, and inseparable, pierced the heat, cutting through the rhythmic whiplash of work and the sighs of exhausted bodies. Caleb and Alara had been born, and with them came a disruption the plantation's ledger could not account for. For the first moment they drew breath. It was clear. These two were no ordinary children. They were a single spirit split into twin vessels, bound by a connection so profound that even the iron chains and cruel orders surrounding them seemed powerless. While the overseers obsessed over labor quotas and punishments, the twins shared a silent understanding that defied every rule imposed upon them. One glance, a subtle gesture, and the other knew exactly what was being thought. They could read fear, intention, and opportunity in the subtlest of movements. And today, in that suffocating August heat, they would test that connection in ways the plantation had never seen. Their world was one of careful survival. Daylight was spent bending under the weight of the master's demands. Nightfall brought fleeting moments where whispered plans could be exchanged. Caleb, the older by mere minutes, had a temper hidden behind a studied calm. Alara, sharp and perceptive, could read danger like a map, tracing every shadow to its end. Together, they were a storm contained in small, unassuming forms. And it was precisely that storm that would make the plantation regret underestimating them. The first opportunity arrived subtly. As the overseer, a man named Brant, stomped past the edge of the quarters to chastise a worker for spilling a bucket of water, the twins noted it instantly. Brant's attention was momentarily diverted, his eyes squinting against the sun. Caleb touched Alara's arm, a feather-light press, and in that instant she understood. Today was not for chores. Today was for escape. The plantation, with its carefully arranged fences and watchtowers, had been studied for months. The twins had memorized patrol patterns, the sound of every dog bark, the timing of the guard's shifts. Everything had to align perfectly. One misstep could cost them their lives. "Remember," Caleb whispered, his voice almost swallowed by the cicadas, "we stick together. No matter what." Alara nodded, her dark eyes flicking to the line of laborers bending under the relentless sun. None suspected a thing. They were too accustomed to suffering, too beaten down to notice rebellion before it happened. But Caleb and Alara were different. They moved with the precision of two halves of a whole. Their escape had to be invisible, almost ethereal. The first stage of their plan involved the creek that cut through the northern edge of the plantation. Hidden by the dense overgrowth, it was the one place the overseers rarely checked. Water ran fast there, muddy and thick with roots, but it offered cover, a path away from the prying eyes of the masters. They waited for the perfect moment. The overseer's whistle sounded for lunch, and Brant's attention turned entirely to the mess of spilled water. With a glance to each other, the twins slipped quietly, almost dancing across the sun-baked soil toward the creek. The undergrowth closed around them like a living thing, twisting and snapping with every careful step. Caleb moved first, testing the path, while Alara mirrored his movements, matching him breath for breath. For the first time that day, they felt a sliver of freedom, not yet complete but palpable. Their bond was a tether and a shield. Each step was guided by unspoken communication, anticipating dangers before they arrived. And danger, as they knew, was never far behind. From somewhere deep in the shadows, a dog barked, sharp and sudden. Both froze. The sound reverberated through the trees, echoing off the distant hills. Their hearts hammered, but neither flinched. Caleb's hand brushed Ilara's shoulder, a signal to keep moving. The dog was on the edge of the patrol, more curious than trained. It would not be a threat if they kept calm. As they reached the creek, the water glinted in the sun, deceptively shallow but rushing fast enough to conceal their tracks. Caleb dipped his fingers into it, testing the flow, and nodded. Ilara followed, stepping in carefully, her small feet sinking into the mud beneath the surface. Together, they moved upstream, letting the current mask the prints of their escape. Behind them, the plantation sprawled like a cage, invisible now, but ever present. Hours passed, marked only by the position of the sun and the lengthening shadows. The twins had left the open fields behind and entered the dense forest, a living labyrinth of roots and gnarled trees. Each step carried the risk of discovery, yet their spirits surged with the thrill of the impossible. The sound of distant shouts occasionally reached them. Other slaves, punished for missteps, unaware of the rebellion unfolding just beyond their sight. Caleb's jaw tightened, his eyes scanning the underbrush for any sign of the bounty hunters rumored to patrol these woods. Stories told of men who would track slaves relentlessly, 100 strong, relentless in pursuit. But these were not ordinary twins. The bond they shared, the cunning they possessed, made them unpredictable. And unpredictable meant dangerous to those who relied on brute force alone. Night fell, and with it the forest transformed. Shadows thickened, becoming walls. Every rustle of leaves seemed a threat. Every hoot of an owl sounded like a warning. In the darkness, Caleb and Ilara thrived. Their senses sharpened. They could hear one another's heartbeat. They could anticipate each other's movements. Every step, every decision was a dance honed by necessity and survival. They were still miles from freedom, but the first taste of it, the very possibility, was intoxicating. Suddenly, the snap of a branch echoed, too close, too deliberate. Caleb grabbed Ilara's hand, pulling her into the shadow of a tree. Through the undergrowth, figures emerged. Men on horseback, their eyes glinting with the promise of capture. The bounty hunters. Stories had called them cruel, ruthless, and unrelenting. 100 men, the tales said, had never failed to capture a target. Yet here the twins were, two bodies bound by one mind, poised against a force that had terrorized countless others. Ilara's hand tightened around Caleb's, a silent signal. They would not go quietly. Caleb crouched, whispering instructions. They moved with uncanny synchrony, weaving through trees, disappearing from sight in a manner that seemed almost supernatural. The hunters cursed and shouted, swinging torches, beating the ground, but the twins were ghosts among the shadows. Their knowledge of the terrain, their preternatural bond, made them untouchable for now. Hours of pursuit passed in a blur of heartbeats and whispered coordination. Caleb and Ilara led the hunters in circles, exploiting the forest's twists and hidden ravines. One by one, the men fell into traps, snares carefully camouflaged, sudden pits covered with branches, the cunning application of rivers and slippery banks. The twins did not kill. They only delayed, used the terrain to their advantage, and each time the hunters faltered, the twins gained precious distance. They were survival incarnate, each step a testament to the impossibility of their escape. Finally, exhausted and on the brink of despair, the twins reached a clearing. The moon hung low, bathing the ground in silver light. At the center stood an old wagon, abandoned, its wheels half buried in the dirt. A path stretched beyond it, leading to freedom, or at least the first taste of it. Caleb and Ilara paused, looking at one another. No words were needed. The moment was theirs, fleeting and precious, and yet heavy with the knowledge that this was only the beginning. The forest behind them was alive with the shouts of defeated hunters, the cracking of branches, the distant roar of dogs. And still, the twins pressed forward, their bond unbroken, their determination absolute. They were shadows moving through a world that had never anticipated their cunning. They were hope incarnate, a story that would echo far beyond the confines of the plantation, a tale of two souls refusing to be shackled. The forest seemed alive with whispers that night, each rustle of leaves carrying a warning. Caleb and Alara moved with caution, every step measured, every sound cataloged. The clearing behind them was now miles away, and though the shouts of the hunters had faded, the twins knew better than to assume safety. They had not survived this long merely by luck. Instinct, preparation, and their unbreakable bond had kept them alive. Alara's sharp eyes scanned the shadows ahead. Branches. Low, sharp. Watch your step, she warned, and Caleb adjusted his stride accordingly. Every step could mean life or death. Every miscalculation could bring the hunters back within range. He could feel the tension radiating from her like heat. Two bodies, one soul, moving as one. Night deepened. The moon hung like a silver sentinel above, illuminating the forest path in a ghostly glow. The twins reached a narrow ravine, a gap in the terrain they had memorized. Caleb paused at the edge, calculating the distance. Alara's gaze flicked down, noting the loose rocks and crumbling soil. "We can jump," she said, steady, unwavering. Caleb nodded, trusting her judgment. Together, they leaped, landing in a tangle of roots and leaves, the noise swallowed by the dark. For a moment, they allowed themselves to breathe, but it was short-lived. From the edge of the trees came a shout, urgent and angry. The hunters had spotted signs of their passage: broken branches, disturbed soil, the faint glimmer of moonlight reflecting off a watchful eye. They were relentless, fueled by pride, cruelty, and the lure of reward. And yet, even faced with such force, Caleb and Alara pressed forward, exploiting every crevice, every shadow, every hidden path the forest offered. Hours blurred into each other as they moved deeper, the forest thickening, branches clawing at their skin. Hunger and fatigue gnawed at them, but neither hesitated. Their minds, bound in perfect synchrony, compensated for what their bodies lacked. They recalled the stories of those who had tried to escape before, the ones who had been caught, broken, or worse. Each step carried the weight of history, the burden of survival, and the unspoken promise that they would not be claimed like the others. Suddenly, a snapping twig sounded close behind. Caleb froze, hand on Alara's arm. A horse's whinny echoed through the trees. The hunters had regained ground, faster than expected. From their hidden vantage points, the twins could see torchlight flickering, a dozen men mounted, relentless, closing in. Their breath caught in their throats, but there was no time to panic. Every move had to be calculated, every misstep avoided. Alara spotted a narrow cave entrance partially obscured by vines. "Here," she whispered. They slipped inside, pressed against the cold, damp stone walls, listening to the hunters' horses pounding the forest floor. The voices were close, searching, questioning. Caleb's heart pounded. They could not remain here for long. The cave offered cover, but it also risked entrapment. "Wait for the right moment," he whispered, feeling the tension coil around them like a living thing. Alara nodded. They moved silently, shadows within shadows, until the hunters' shouts began to fade, the search pattern moving beyond their immediate vicinity. Even then, Caleb knew the danger was far from over. The hunters were clever, experienced, and brutal. They would not give up. Emerging from the cave, the twins entered a swampy section of the forest. Mud clung to their feet, roots threatened to trip them at every step, and the scent of decay hung heavy in the air. But the swamp also offered opportunity. Horses could not navigate this terrain easily, and the hunters would be slowed. Caleb and Alara's plan relied on using the environment itself as a weapon. With careful, deliberate movements, they led the pursuers into the thickest part of the marsh, slipping through channels and hidden paths, leaving traps behind, snags of vines, hidden pits, and false trails. Hours later, the twins reached an abandoned cabin, half sunken into the earth, walls rotting but roof intact. Inside, they allowed themselves a brief respite. Caleb pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook he had kept hidden, detailing patrol patterns, terrain knowledge, and contingency plans. "We're not safe yet," he reminded Alara, though the tremor in his voice betrayed fatigue. "They'll adapt." Alara's hands shook slightly as she examined the cabin. "We've survived this far," she said, voice steadying with determination. "We will survive the rest." Her words were not just reassurance. They were a promise, a contract between two souls. But the forest did not forgive mistakes. From the edge of the clearing, a shadow moved, familiar, human, but twisted by obsession. One of the hunters had followed them, independent of the main group. His eyes glinted with the thrill of imminent capture. The twins spotted him just as he drew a bead with a rifle. Caleb pushed Alara behind him, tackling her to the ground. The shot rang out, splitting the night, and a branch fell where they had been standing moments before. Their timing had saved them, but the hunter was now aware of the cabin's location. The twins had no choice. They moved again, deeper into the forest, relying on instinct and bond more than sight. The trees grew denser, the ground uneven, but each step forward was a defiance, a refusal to be caught. They remembered the stories of others who had been captured, tortured, returned, and erased. They would not be added to that ledger. As they moved, Caleb's mind raced with possibilities. The hunters were relentless. There were too many of them, and each had experience and cruelty that made them dangerous. They needed a strategy that went beyond fleeing. They needed to disorient, divide, and outsmart. The forest, wild and untamed, could be leveraged. Fallen trees, narrow ravines, and the swampy terrain became tools in their hands, each trap invisible until it was too late. A sudden sound, a child's cry, sharp and jarring, broke the tense rhythm. Caleb froze. Alara mirrored him. It was a trick, surely. Hunters often use deception to lure escapees into traps. But the twins had learned to trust intuition over assumption. Following the sound cautiously, they discovered a narrow ravine filled with debris, forming a natural snare for anyone reckless enough to enter. They moved silently, guiding the sound along the edge, leading unseen hunters into hazards. Hours dragged into the cold darkness of early dawn. Exhaustion gnawed at their limbs, but the adrenaline of survival kept them moving. At last, they reached a high ridge overlooking a river that promised the next stage of freedom. Beyond it lay uncharted territory, a place where they could disappear and vanish from the world they had been forced to endure. But freedom never comes unchallenged. At the ridge, they encountered the main body of bounty hunters, now coordinated, disciplined, and desperate. Horses snorted, weapons were raised, and men shouted orders that echoed off the rocky cliffs. Caleb and Alara exchanged a glance, one that needed no words. They would not surrender. The final stage of their escape required ingenuity, courage, and every ounce of their bond. Alara spotted a narrow ledge along the cliffside. "If we can reach the other side, the river will be ours," she whispered. Caleb nodded. Timing was critical. Together, they sprinted, leaping from rocks, sliding down steep inclines, dodging shots fired from the hunters above. Each move was calculated, each risk weighted. One mistake could cost everything. The hunters were close, too close. One horse stumbled on loose rock, and a man nearly fell into the ravine. Caleb seized the moment, using their momentum to swing Alara over the final rock face. They landed in the river below, cold, swift, and merciless. The current carried them away, tossing and pulling, but safety at last seemed tangible. Above, the hunters cursed and scrambled, unable to navigate the treacherous cliffs. The twin strategy had worked, for now. Exhausted but alive, they floated down the river, hidden beneath the shadows of the trees, knowing that this was only the beginning. Beyond the forest, the world remained a hostile place, but Caleb and Alara had survived against impossible odds, outsmarting 100 ruthless hunters with nothing but wit, courage, and their inseparable bond. As the first light of dawn crept across the horizon, the twins clung to each other, hearts still racing. They were free, yet not yet safe. The journey ahead promised new challenges, greater dangers, and tests of trust that would stretch their connection to the limits. But one truth remained undeniable. Together, they were unstoppable. And the story of their impossible escape had only just begun. The river carried Caleb and Alara through a world that seemed unfamiliar despite its raw, natural beauty. The cold water lapped against them, washing away the grime of the forest and the sweat of relentless flight. Their muscles ached, lungs burned, but their spirits surged with the knowledge that they had survived the impossible. The 100 hunters who had pursued them, relentless and cruel, were now scattered, some trapped, some fallen, some delayed, but the threat was far from gone. Survival demanded they stay sharp, move faster, and trust in one another completely. As dawn broke, painting the sky with streaks of gold and crimson, they reached the riverbank, where jagged rocks and wild undergrowth made landing treacherous. Caleb pulled Alara up first, her small frame almost weightless in the early morning haze. They crouched low, listening. Silence stretched across the landscape, a deceptive calm. The forest behind them whispered of movement. They had outsmarted the hunters so far, but Caleb knew instinctively that the final confrontation loomed. Up the ridge, Caleb whispered, pointing to a narrow path that climbed sharply from the riverbank. "We can find higher ground, plan the next move." Alara nodded, tightening her grip on his hand. Their bond had never been just emotional. It was tactical, a lifeline that allowed them to move as one mind and two bodies. Each decision was synchronized, each reaction anticipated. The ridge was steep, treacherous, but it offered visibility and, more importantly, an opportunity to turn the tables. The climb was exhausting. Loose rocks tumbled underfoot, threatening to send them plummeting back to the river below. Their breath came in ragged bursts, but neither hesitated. Every glance revealed the faint traces of their pursuers, horseshoes imprinted in the muddy banks, footprints winding through the undergrowth. The hunters were clever, relentless, and patient. But Caleb and Alara had something no man could match. Instinct honed by desperation and a bond that could anticipate danger before it arrived. At the ridge's peak, the forest stretched endlessly, a living labyrinth that both protected and threatened them. Caleb scanned the horizon, noting the distant movement of men on horseback. There were more than he had expected. At least 24 regrouped, now strategizing, aware of the twins' tactics, and ready to adapt. Alara's eyes narrowed. "We can't outrun all of them," she said softly, "but we can choose the battlefield." Caleb's lips pressed into a thin line. He knew she was right. They could not simply flee. The hunters would adapt, and with their numbers, they would eventually corner them. The forest, the river, the ravines, all tools, all traps, but insufficient without strategy. "Then we make them come to us," he said, a spark of daring in his gaze. "We fight smart, not hard." The plan was audacious. They would lead the hunters into the old quarry, a place abandoned, treacherous, with cliffs and jagged stones. There, the terrain itself would do the killing, or at least incapacitating, leaving the twins free to escape. But it required precise timing. One misstep, one false move, and the quarry would become a tomb. Hours passed as they navigated the forest, choosing paths that concealed their movements. Caleb and Alara moved like phantoms, shadows against shadows, guided by intuition and experience. Every snapping twig, every distant shout, every glimmer of torchlight was cataloged, interpreted, and incorporated into the next step. They were prey and predator, invisible and unstoppable. Finally, they reached the quarry, its mouth yawning like a great, jagged maw. The cliffs rose sharply on either side, crumbling rock threatening to fall at the slightest disturbance. The hunters were not far behind. The sound of hooves pounding through undergrowth drew closer. Caleb took Alara's hand, squeezing tightly. "We're ready. Stick together, no matter what." The hunters arrived soon after, entering the quarry cautiously, wary of traps. Their leader, a burly man with a scar across his cheek, shouted orders, organizing his men into formations designed to corner the twins. But Caleb and Alara had anticipated every tactic. Rocks were loosened, vines arranged to trip and entangle, false trails leading the hunters into pits hidden beneath leaves. Chaos erupted. Horses stumbled into snares. Men fell into hidden pits, the twins moving fluidly among the shadows, striking only to divert, mislead, and survive. They were untouchable, two souls acting as one, turning the quarry into a deadly maze where the hunter's strength became their weakness. But the battle was far from over. The leader of the hunters, enraged by the failure of his men, advanced with a rifle, tracking Caleb and Alara relentlessly. Every step, every heartbeat was synchronized between the twins. Caleb dodged a swinging branch, while Alara used the moment to create a distraction, a cascade of rocks tumbling to force the leader into imbalance. A single misstep sent him sprawling, rifle clattering uselessly across the jagged stone. Exhaustion gnawed at them, yet adrenaline sharpened their senses. They moved as shadows, anticipating danger, exploiting weakness. The hunters, though numerous and brutal, could not comprehend the unity, the intuition, the perfect communication between the twins. Each trap they fell into was a testament to the impossible. Two young souls defying the odds, outsmarting men who had captured dozens before. As dawn broke fully over the horizon, casting pale light into the quarry, the last of the hunters were trapped, exhausted, or incapacitated. Caleb and Alara, bruised and weary, stood at the edge, overlooking the open land that promised freedom. The path ahead was still fraught with peril. No man could guarantee safety, but for the first time, they were unbound. For the first time, the horizon was theirs. Caleb turned to Alara, the bond between them stronger than ever. "We made it this far," he said, voice raw but triumphant. "We're unstoppable together." Alara smiled, her eyes bright despite the fatigue. "And this is only the beginning," she replied. "They'll never catch us." The twins moved forward, leaving the quarry behind, a testament to courage, cunning, and the unbreakable bond that had carried them through impossible odds. Their story would echo far beyond the forest, beyond the plantations, beyond the cruelty of men who sought to dominate. Caleb and Alara had done the impossible. They had survived, they had outsmarted 100 hunters, and they had claimed their freedom. As they disappeared into the wild expanse of open land, the forest fell silent behind them. The hunters, defeated, scattered, would tell tales of the twins who could not be caught, a story that would pass in a legend, whispered among those who still dared to dream of escape. And though their journey continued, the impossible had already been accomplished. Caleb and Alara had proven that even the harshest darkness, unity, courage, and cunning could overcome cruelty, oppression, and numbers. They were free, and in that freedom, the world would never be the same.